Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar about the corporate social credit system in China. Quite important topic. Beside me, there are my colleagues Mareike Seselberg and Xihao Liao. Both are focused on the social credit system and will go deeper into the details. That's a quite interesting statement of Premier Li to put the social credit system into context. He said, let more workers get back to work and make money as soon as possible. That's a signal to the world that we must see the social credit system, the corporate social credit system in context. The corona crisis is a temporary phenomenon, and China will master this very well and quickly. In contrast, the social credit system is a structural phenomenon. For many European companies, the China business will become more important, but also more difficult in the middle term. The system leads to increasing pressure on foreign companies, stronger controls, active persecution by the authorities. That means that we, the Western companies in China, have a tighter room for maneuver. Additionally, we will have a higher risk level because of the so-called technology war between the United States and China. This war leads to increasing national decoupling of technology research, data, the free movement of people, supply chain standard, etc. Also, there is a strategy made in China 2025, and that leads to displacement of foreign suppliers. This strategy will also increase the risk level for Western companies in China. And finally, we have to consider the cybersecurity law. That means strict regulations and restrictions on the use of data in China. As a result, European companies need a fitness cure. They have to adapt their strategies, business models, and their organization. We will address the following topics in this webinar. What is the corporate social credit system in general? What are the main points of the system? And finally, most important, what should companies do in a timely manner to react?
Thank you for the introduction. Now I will take over. You all have probably seen pictures like that one in the media before, and you also probably have read articles about social credit system and its implications for persons, like the social credit system collecting a lot of different data from different areas in private person's life. But what we want to talk about today is how this system also is applicable for companies and what implication it has for companies. As you can see on this slide, the corporate social credit system can be separated in three parts. One part of it is information about companies, one is about countries, like the country's institutions, and one is about citizens, private persons. The part we are focusing on in this webinar is companies only. Here you can see a black box, which we take as a symbol for the social credit system at the moment. The social credit system is a black box because on one hand side, it's not exactly clear what information is fed into it. And more important, it is not clear what the result is, like what the scoring is that will come out of the social credit system after it has analyzed all the data about your company. So what data we know that is fed into the system is data from offices, administrative authorities, courts, and other official institutions and organizations. They put all the official information into the system, and these information will definitely be analyzed. There are other passes and channels over which information can get into the system. One of them is voluntarily information about your company. And this also includes information you give to authorities like annual reports or tax reports or other reports that might be required by laws like the cybersecurity law or other regulations. Then there's the third part, a really interesting part. It's whistleblowing, which means other people or companies can hand in information about you or hand in any mistakes that you have made to authorities, and this will also be taken into the final score of your company. This path is so far not that well developed. There are ways to hand in information about other companies, but it is not used very much, and we have no information how serious this information is taken by the authorities. Also, quite interesting numbers that there are already over 34 billion entries in the system. And the complete information is only accessible to the authorities. Only parts of this information can be seen by everybody who can read Chinese. Also, due to the social credit system, there is now a unified social credit code for each company. It's a 18-digit number, and the parts of this number contain certain information about the company. For example, from the number, it's obvious if it's a company, a hospital, or a school. Previously, companies had separate numbers for business registration, tax registration numbers, and so on. But now it's just this one code that is used for all the official systems. This was a really important step, as there are quite a big number of companies in China. And now with this code, it's no problem to identify each company. Especially in our business, it's quite interesting, as a lot of companies have very similar names. In our business, mostly it's intentional that they copy names of Western companies to confuse the consumers. But now with this code, at least for the authorities, it's very easy to identify each company. So why is the social credit system also important for your company? There are mainly three big channels which will have an influence on your company. Firstly, it's the online platforms. You might have heard of them. There are two main platforms called Credit China and the National Enterprise System. I will tell you more about them later. These are systems where you can get basic company information. Then the second channel is the scoring. This is the part about which the Western media is talking the most. It's actually, there's more than just one scoring or one score for each company. Like, for example, there's a tax score, which means there's a maximum possible score of 1,000, which would mean that you're an excellent taxpayer. And especially in regard of tax, it's not very difficult to achieve a good rating, a good score, which means if you pay your tax regularly and pay the amount that you have to pay, you will already have a good score. But as I mentioned, there are different scores at the moment, like scores for tax paying, credit scores, and so on. And then there are lists, which at the moment are probably the part of the social credit system with the biggest influence on your company. There are three lists, the blacklist, watch lists, and red lists. And these lists are public. So that means if your company is put on any of these three lists, your customers, your partners, also your competitors will be able to see this. And being put on a list also means that there will be consequences, especially if you're on a blacklist. This will definitely have negative consequences for your company. I will come to this later also. So these are the two main platforms on which information can be checked by anybody. On the left-hand side, you see the Credit China website. On the right-hand side, you can see the National Enterprise Credit Information Publicity System. In the search bars, you can just enter the name of the company or the unified company number. And if you enter them, you will get informations about these companies. Unfortunately, both websites are still only in Chinese, so you might need some help to handle them. So what information will you get if you enter a company name in these systems? Of course, you will get basic information on the company, like when was it registered, who registered it, and so on. You will also find the unified social credit number, further registration information, and administrative authorizations. And of course, most important, the red list, watch list, and blacklist on which this company is listed. We do expect that there will be more information public disclosed later on in the development of the social credit system, but so far the most important information you can find here is the listings on any of these 3 lists. So now I will hand over to my colleague Sahal, who will tell you more about these lists.
Thanks very much. As my colleague just said, information of the companies in the corporate social security system can already be found online. And the most important contents of the corporate social security system are 3 lists, namely red list, watch list, and blacklist. Red list means award, and watch list means transition phase, and blacklist means punishment. I would like to make a short introduction to explain how the company is listed in the corporate social security system. Generally, there are 3 steps. First, the government defines the requirement that the company must meet in order to get a good rating. Secondly, with the use of the new technologies, the authorities will collect the information of the company and their activities and monitor their behavior. Thirdly, the collected information will be evaluated based on the defined requirement of the authorities, and then the good result will lead to red list. That means advantages like fast track in administrative procedure or either financing. And negative result will lead to watch list or blacklist. That means more inspection or difficulties with financing and market access. In order to show the content of these 3 lists better, I will use the real examples on the platform to explain. And first, have a look at the red list. The real example of the red list is Zhou Shanzhen Yang, and the reason is A-level taxpayer. A-level taxpayer is a very typical red list on the platforms. And the procedure of that is as follows. Each company begins with 100 points. If the requirement of the authorities is not met, then deductions will be made, and every company will get a final score. And then the companies will be evaluated on a category of A, B, C, D, and M. Each category is related to the defined range of points. For example, here, A-level taxpayer means the company has gotten 90 points or more points of 100 points. If the company is already rated as an A-level taxpayer, there's so many advantages for the company. For example, there is a green way for the company for the tax payment. What is more important is that the company can not only get the tax benefits, but also benefits from other authorities. Like the company can get a quick appointment with authorities because of social security things, or the company will also be better financed than other companies that were not rated as an A-level taxpayer. Watch list. Watch list as a transition phase to blacklist should be paid attention to, because if the company pay attention to the watch list on time and meets the requirements of the authorities, then it will run well again. Otherwise, the companies will be blacklisted, which brings so many avoidable disadvantages for the company. And as so far, there are so many central authorities in China have been published guidelines for this topic, like tax office or the customs office. Here, I would like to take the guideline of the administration for industry and commerce as an example to explain which are the specific reasons for the watch list. According to these guidelines, there are 4 reasons for watch list. For example, non-disclosure of the relevant company information. But we have to be aware of that These 4 reasons will not lead to the watchlist directly. Usually the company has another chance to fulfill the requirement of the authorities. For example, if there is a reason because of the non-disclosure of the report with a statutory period, then the company can submit the report in due time without being asked. Only when the company doesn't meet this requirement, then it will be listed on the watch list. The real example of watch list is Shenzhen Baichang Dawang, and the reason is contact via the address not possible. As we can see here, not only the name of the company and the reason of watch list, but also other important information of the company will be shown online, like the Unified Social Credit Code and the Managing Director. And here we should always be aware of that the laws and guidelines in China will be interpreted differently in different provinces. That means not only the state laws and guidelines should be taken seriously, but also the guidelines in provincial level. Thirdly, blacklist. Blacklist is actually not new for companies in China, but with the corporate social credit system and the online platform, blacklisted companies can be researched on the publication platform. That means it's obviously to see which companies can get less trust from the Chinese authorities. And the blacklist means not only the listed company can get disadvantages, but also the partner companies will be influenced, regardless of whether they are domestic or the foreign companies. And according to the online research, it's already confirmed that so many violations of the laws by the German companies are already documented in the Chinese database. For example, violation of the advertising law by BMW Beijing, because BMW has used some words like the best or the best in China in the advertising, which is against the advertising law in China. At the same, I will use the guideline of administration of industry and commerce as an example to explain the reasons for blacklist. And according to this guideline, there are 10 different reasons for blacklist. Number 1 to number 9 are the specific reasons, but number 10 is a general clause, other serious violations of regulations. That means the authority can also list the company on the blacklisting so many other situations. And the real example of blacklist is Hongyuan Biotechnology. Here, just like the watch list, not only the name of the company and the reason of blacklist will be shown, other important information of the companies will also be found online. Here, I want to emphasize that by the online research, if the company or the partner company is already on the blacklist, we have to always look for the companies in all important platforms. Like here, we can already find the company 新源县宏远生物科技有限公司 in the platform National Enterprise System, but in another platform, China Credit, there is no information of the blacklist. Therefore, it's very important to look for the companies in all important platforms. And finally, I want to say the German companies should realize these 3 lists are not entirely separate. One list can affect another list, especially the blacklist can affect the red list. For example, if the company is rated as an D-level taxpayer, namely on the blacklist, then the company can't be awarded as an A-level taxpayer in the next rating phase. And usually it takes several years for the company from a negative result to an A-level taxpayer. And then my colleague will explain what the consequences of the blacklisting are and what the company should do.
Thank you. So I will continue with consequences of blacklisting. Obviously, it depends on which reasons you are put on the blacklist, and according to the reasons, there will be specific consequences. But some consequences might be, for example, more frequent inspections by the authorities or additional audits by the competent authorities. negative influence on approvals, like business licenses or building permits, negative influence on financial matters. For example, you might not get credits anymore, or you have to pay a higher rate for credits, something like that. Also, the exclusion from public tenders might be quite serious for some companies. And also the public branding on the websites is not to be neglected, as this means potential business partners might see that you're blacklisted and might not be willing to work together with you anymore, as they fear that your blacklisting might influence their own score. So this is only part of the consequences that the blacklisting can have. And what also has to be mentioned is that the blacklisting of a company also influenced the social credit score of their employees, especially legal representatives and higher managers. Like here you can see examples that legal representatives might not work for other companies as legal representatives for the next 3 years, restriction of qualification certificates, exclusion from the world of honorary titles, travel restrictions. This is also something that has been reported a lot in the Western media, like restrictions on taking the fast train or flight. So there are also reports on consequences like that. You might not be able to bring your child on a very good school or something like that. So there are a lot of consequences, not just for the company, but also for your management. Here is a table that's only an example, but it shows that if you see the sanctions for bad ratings and compare them to the incentives for high ratings, it is very clear that the sanctions at the moment prevail. So the incentives, there are incentives at the moment for high ratings, but the sanctions are a lot heavier than the incentives are. This is actually not the plan of the social credit system, but this is the way it is at the moment. We don't know if that will change in the future, but at the moment it can clearly be seen that there are more sanctions and bad consequences for companies than there are incentives. This is also reflected in the memoranda between the different institutes, the administrative institutions in China. There are more than 50 authorities that have made memorandums on joint actions based on the social credit system. This means the authorities come together and decide if a company infringes or violates any rule from a certain authority. Other authorities will also punish this company, even if the thing that the company did wrong has nothing to do with them. And there are 40 of this, more than 50 memoranda, 43 memoranda are only concerning joint punishment. And only 5 memoranda are based on joint incentives of authorities, and 3 memoranda are on both. So yeah, this is a quite clear image on the focus that the social credit system is on at the moment, which is punishment. And there's also punishment for misconduct of partners. So what should you do now? The first step obviously is to check your own company. Check if you are listed in any red list, which would be good, and check if you are on any watch list and blacklist. And you should not only check the company, but you should also check the key personnel in your Chinese subsidiaries. So that means don't only enter the company name, but also check for the credit scores of your most important employees in China. And for the red list, one more thing. As we have mentioned before, there is not just one red list, so it might be necessary to check through several red lists to see if you're on there. And for that, you should also consider checking on regional platforms, not only the big platforms mentioned before. You should also check on your important partners. Also, as mentioned before, the score of your partner or the listing of your partner has an influence on your score and your listing. So check if your partners can be found on any watch list or blacklist, and check what reasons this has. There might be some reasons that might not have a too big influence on your company, but if they're put on a blacklist based on quality issues with their products or something that might have a direct influence on your company. So this is something that definitely should be checked. What do you do if you find yourself on any blacklist? There are two options. Like, one is you're mistakenly blacklisted. This might happen. If this happens, you have to immediately go on and follow the procedure to appeal against this blacklisting. There are two parallel systems for that at the moment. One is a system for appeals against administrative decisions. This is not new. This has existed before and can still be used. And then there's a new system which was developed specifically for the social credit procedures. So you have these two ways. It's not important which one you choose, but you should do it very fast. Then if you're blacklisted because you did something wrong, you should, as fast as possible, correct this error and report it to the relevant authority. You might be able to arrange that you will be taken from the blacklist earlier than that would happen automatically. So this also means you should always try to keep a friendly contact to the relevant authorities, because this might help in the end to get off a blacklist faster, or a watch list. So next step is to avoid, if you have checked yourself on the list and you have seen you're not on any watch list or blacklist, what you should do next is to make sure that you will not land on any list like this in the future. So check if all the documents that your company sends to authorities are all right, if your tax report is all right, if your company is doing everything according to the laws. And evaluate the required documents. Check if there are any further documents that should be handed in, or if there is any actual difference between the requirements for certain documents and the actual documents that you have handed in. And this also leads me directly to the next point that I want to talk about, which is setting up a compliance system. So this is a very important part in your reaction to the social credit system, because this is mainly about compliance. If you are compliant under normal situation, you should not be listed on the social credit system. But this compliance or being compliant in China might be somewhat more complicated than it is in other countries, due to the very complicated structure of Chinese laws. So what you need to do first is check on all the relevant laws, regulations, and guidelines. It's not that straightforward in China that you can just say, well, there are laws and I have to obey them. There are also some regulations which are not called law but are still obligatory, and there are even some guidelines that have to be obeyed. So check regularly that you know of all the relevant guidelines, regulations, and laws for your company. And as the law landscape in China is changing very fast, you have to do a regular check that there are not any new laws that you have to be aware of. Here are some new regulations which are also relevant for the corporate social credit system, which should be taken into account when doing a compliance system, which are the first one is a regulation regarding intellectual property, and the second one regarding social security regulations. These are only examples to show that there are actually quite a lot of small laws and regulations that have to be taken into account, and that might come into force very fast without you taking notice of it. The second phase is that you have to check if you have the whole pile of laws that you have to pay attention to. You have to check through these laws what specific obligations there are for your company. And this means there, as in other countries too, different compliance areas like tax, import, export, employers, intellectual property, and so on. And from these different areas, you have to check which duties you have for your company, like, for example, annual tax declarations, regular reports to the authorities, maybe because of cybersecurity reasons, and so on. And also, for example, establishing a legally compliant IT system. Of course, we cannot list all the obligations that your company will have, and this also differs from company to company. But what our message is here is check through the laws and don't take compliance on the light shoulder in China. You have to take it seriously because it's more difficult than in other countries, and due to the social credit system, there might be harsher consequences if you don't obey. So after you have built a compliance system for your company according to the relevant regulations, you will have to implement it. That does not mean that you just write it down and then put that document in your folder and never talk about it again. This means, for example, making guidelines, manuals for your employees, or even trainings for your employees. The best thing would be to do something like that regularly, to organize a structure for the compliance department, and to have uniform internal processes in case that in case that something goes wrong, but also uniform internal processes like how things have to be handled in general. You have to define responsibilities and certain measures that have to be taken. One important part is also a compliant IT system. I have mentioned it several times now. There is the cybersecurity law in China, which has strict regulations on your IT system. So this is also something that should be done in the near future. Then, for example, it might be necessary to redesign your contracts and so on. So there's quite a lot that has to be done in the implementation of the compliance system. And this is also not something that you do once. This is something that has to be updated, same as phase 2. If you update your compliance system, you also have to do to implement the new stuff. So now I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Fuchs, who will tell you more about the risks of the social credit system.
Thank you, Mareike. Sometimes we hear the argument that the corporate social credit system is quite good for us foreign companies in China because the system makes the bad Chinese companies transparent, the unfair competitors and counterfeiters, for example. That's a short view. That's wrong. This view is wrong. The system raises the China business of both parties to a significantly higher risk level. The counterfeiter or the unfair competitor can bring us to the system, can research and identify our problems, our mistakes, our deficits, and bring it into the system, as well as we can do. So both parties are involved. That means that the game, the risk level of the whole game of the China business is much higher. It's much more dangerous and difficult. Additionally, we have the decoupling risks resulting from the strategy made in China 2025 and other compliance risks, so that the game is much more riskier in China. As a result, we have much higher monetary damage potential. If something happens, the damage in terms of money is much higher, and also the probability of occurrence. So the risk exposure will increase dramatically. Let's talk about counterfeiting. the system suddenly brings counterfeiting into the light. It makes the counterfeiting activities and the fakes on the market known in the public. Some of our clients are strongly interested not to talk about their counterfeiting problems in China in the public, but now the systems brings this on the stage and makes this known in the market. And this puts pressure on both counterfeiters and the original manufacturers. You can be wrongly suspected of placing substandard products in the Chinese market, can lead to responsibility and liability if something happens. The system forces original manufacturers to implement and prove sustainable and effective measures to clean up the market. So because everything is visible now, you are forced to show to the public, to the government, to the market partners, yes, we are dealing with this topic. We try to clean the market. This is now a result of the system. The toleration of brand and product piracy results in a poor rating. If you accept counterfeiting and do nothing against it, that could damage your brand because it's publicly known. There's also an increasing risk in competition. The system makes ratings of suppliers a central competitive factor, similar to their prices or service quality or delivery times. For example, if you book a hotel online, a holiday hotel, and there is, you look for the quality of the hotel, the location, the price, and so on. But you look also to the ratings from other customers or other guests. And if the rating is very bad, you will never book this hotel. The same happens in the market in China with suppliers. If you have a negative rating, I fear that most of the potential customers will not book your services or order your products. This is the point. It's a competition issue. In the market, the assessment of the system can lead to significant competitive advantages and disadvantages. Both are possible. This is the typical classical risk management systems. Everybody knows it from the textbook. We can apply this to the corporate social credit system. We can avoid, in the first step, avoid the risk of the system to be blacklisted or observed by a list when we avoid the risk. For example, we can terminate a contract with an illegal or bad supplier or with a negative and illoyal manager. We can terminate the contract. Doing this, you avoid the risk. We can also reduce the risk, for example, by installing a compliance system and deliver training to people, as Mareike mentioned in detail. To shift over a risk, for example, to a supplier is quite an interesting question. Maybe it could be possible to create contracts that consider the risk of being listed in the system. So you can try to design a contract that excludes suppliers which are not confirmed with the system. Compensate system risk is quite difficult. Maybe as a result of disinvestment. If you have a risk and you want to compensate it, you should leave the segment or the market. Currently, some companies, Western companies, leave for other Asian companies, for example, Vietnam or India. Taipei is interesting now. So this is the classical risk strategy portfolio. We can use this quite successful in the area of the corporate social credit system. But you have a residual risk, a risk of risk, and that you have to bear. This is the focus of the strategic risk management. To do a successful strategic risk management, we have to monitor the risk situation continuously. That's a radar early warning system. traditional risk management radar. We have to check to monitor the situation, what's happening. You know that in China everything is changing permanently, and find key figures, indices, relevant factors for your business, and check this continuously on a radar. How is the situation changing to identify the risk, evaluate the risk, use Chinese sources, databases, software tools. There are many tools available in China. We use this, they are not so cheap, a little bit tricky, but a lot of sources are available, Chinese sources, to do this strategic risk management early warning system. The job is to identify, analyze, evaluate, and manage the system risk systematically, permanently, continuously, systematically. You should also integrate this identify risk management in your corporate strategy. This is necessary in the next months and years in China, because the situation is changing in the corporate strategy, development planning. You should prepare risk analysis over the course of the year. You can create risk maps, for example. And finally, you should respond early, long before damage occurs. So to summarize, China will become more stressful. After the corona crisis, we will have a lot of stress with the social credit system for corporations. We have Made in China 2025. We have the cybersecurity law. This makes the business in China more risky, more stressful, more difficult for Western companies. The business in general is intact. China will continue to grow, both in terms of quality and quantity, but the job will be more difficult and riskier. We thank you very much for your attention and your time. If you have any questions, please be so kind and send us an email to info@chinabrand.de. Also, if you need more detailed information, our experts are available. Don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks a lot and good afternoon.